Hello and welcome to a short overview of the radio and television industry. I'm Professor Harper and this is History of Journalism. So, when you look at the early history of radio, which also played into television as well, Hertz produces the first electromagnetic waves. And then in 1899, Marconi sent the first wireless telegraph message across the English Channel. And an important contribution was Fessenden in 1906, who introduced human speech to radio. In 1919, Frank Conrad of Westinghouse started to broadcast music from his home outside of Pittsburgh. 1920, KDKA broadcast the national election returns, and then the first commercial station appeared in New York in 1992. I'm sorry, in 1922. The networks started out as radio networks with David Sarnoff at NBC, started in 1926, 1928. William Paley buys CBS and begins a network. In 1934, it was seen that there needed to be extensive regulation of radio and then later television, something that probably has gone too far today, but the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, came into being. In 1939, David Sarnoff demonstrated television at the World's Fair in New York, but it really wasn't until after World War II that television really took off. There was a regularly scheduled television station in New York in 1940, but because there were a lot of important items such as tungsten, for example, that needed to be used in the production of television, all of that went to the war effort, and so therefore wouldn't allow television to expand until after World War II. 1941, FDR's declaration of war against Japan was broadcast live on radio. In 1943, the federal government saw that David Sarnoff had basically an important monopoly in terms of television, and so it forced Sarnoff to sell off part of it, and NBC Blue became ABC. That's why ABC has the blue logo. In 1947, Bell Laboratories developed the transistor, which made it possible for portable radios. 1949, cable television began operation, and the purpose of television over cable at that point was to provide television to isolated areas. And what happens with radio and television waves is that they can't go through things like mountains. They have to go over them. So what happened here is that there were various fixed stations which broadcast over a short period, going from one tower to another tower to get to places like Ithaca, New York. Rock and roll, 1948. McClendon creates the all news format in Dallas, and then Alan Freed in 1951 launches the rock and roll revival on WJW in Cleveland, which is where the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is situated. A little known fact is that your professor is a member of the South Dakota and Iowa Rock and Roll Hall of Fames. Halls of Fame. I doubt that we'll make it to Cleveland, but who knows. In 1956, Ampex introduced videotape, something that made it much easier and faster to produce television. Before that, it was based on 16 millimeter film. But then there were a variety of problems that were foreseen in terms of what television was becoming. In 1961, FCC Chairman Newton Minow declared television was a vast wasteland because of the dependent upon entertainment programming. But in 1963, the assassination of John Fitzgerald Kennedy was a milestone for television news coverage because the coverage was wall to wall. There were some important developments with the funeral, but also the murder of Lee Harvey Oswald was live on television in Dallas when he was killed being transported from his jail cell to another jail cell. In 1980, Ted Turner began CNN. 1988, Rush Limbaugh began his national radio broadcast, which basically revived and created the whole notion of talk radio. In 1996, Congress passed the Telecommunications Act of 1996, which included greater deregulation of the broadcast markets and allowed the a newspaper and magazines to own radio and television stations and vice versa. Before that, you couldn't have cross ownership of various types of media. And in 1998, the U.S. television started the transition to digital television, which was significant in that it freed up a variety of channels so that, let's say, for example, I owned ABC Channel 7, and it was done on videotape. Well, the production of videotaped programming took up a large space on the spectrum, and by going to digital components and transmission, it allowed one station designation to become four, and so it was seen as a huge development, not only in the quality of television, but also enabled television owners to expand their marketplaces.